Welcome again, everybody. Thank you for being here. Welcome to session 2 of the facilitation training. Again, this is going to be a 90-minute call, so we're going to wrap up around 12:30 Eastern Time. We're excited once again to have Taniya Bethke, who's the Director of Operations at the Council to Advance Hunting in the Shooting Sports, and Matt Dunfee, Director of Special Programs at the Wildlife Management Institute. Again, both of these guests are guest speakers for our SEAFWA gathering call today, where we go through different topics, different guest speakers, talk about biggest needs of the region. But today we're going to follow up with our second session here. Both Taniya and Matt are a wealth of knowledge, and they've hosted many partner engagement R3 summits, partner meetings. So they are the best guest speakers to have and for us to learn from. Also, too, we do want to hear about your experiences. So if you have something you had wanted to share, either from a most recent partner meeting or one that you're planning in the near future, we would love to have that be a part of our discussion today, too. Quick overview of where we've been and where we are now. So last month, end of October, that was session 1. So we went over how to know if you should have a stakeholder meeting or R3 summit or not. Do you know your own needs of your state? And then also, too, do you know the needs of your partners? And then lastly, if you have objectives based on those needs created or not. So those are all questions to ask yourself if you are ready to have a summit. And if so, hence session 2 today. Now that you've done the foundational work, we'll be learning how to set objectives and how to create an agenda that matches your objectives too, all while ensuring that the partners, your attendees, feel like the meeting was worthwhile and productive. And so that you guys, after today, will have tools to put forth for your next partner meeting or summit, shall you be ready and have one in the near future. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to Taniya and Matt.
Perfect, thank you. Taniya, if you could fire up the presentation.
Got it.
All right, I'm gonna start this time. I'm looking, I think we have 10 people, 9 or 10 folks on the call. So here's my ask of you, as I asked in the previous call. Taniya and I aren't the greatest speakers in the world, so we really rely on our audience to help us by filling in some of the white noise. So really, since we've got a small group, really want to encourage all of you to please raise your hand, interject as we're going through this. What this hour is going to be is basically what Taniya and I have learned by screwing up for years and years on this stuff and passing that on to you. But we're also constrained by our own experience. Haven't gone to every state, haven't done all kinds of partner summits. We've done the kinds that we've done, and we've learned those lessons. So you all are experts as well, and your experiences can add seasoning to what we're about to say or even correct it. So please interject as we go through this. We'll follow just a basic framework with the presentation because we got to say something, but we do want to pause frequently to get y'all's engagement and really hope at the end we can do some more of that. So you've been warned. So to begin, let's do a quick overview of where we left off from the previous call for a reminder, as well as for folks that may not have been on that call, because it was a little bit of a different take than typical. So first slide. One of the things Taniya and I recognized when we were looking at this is that when people say R3 Summit, it could be in a bunch of different things. So for us to talk about that, we developed a definition of what we think most folks are meaning, and that's it right here. So let's start from this framework so we all know at least what we're talking about. And if you have a different idea of what a summit is in your head, let's talk about that as we go on. But essentially, the core parts of what we're thinking about when we are considering a summit is that you as an organization, most of you folks I think are agencies, you have a bunch of R3 vested partners and potential partners. You gather them in a place for the purpose of getting their help with what you're doing, coordinating everybody's work, and then telling them essentially, here's what we would like to do, and here's how we want to engage with you in the future. You do that in sort of a large scale, 1 day big show. Probably 1 day because it's hard to get partners there for a couple days. So that's the framework that we're thinking of. Next slide. Now, I should also note that working with me is really difficult. So one of the ways that Taniya and I navigate the difficulty in our relationship is through the catharsis of memes. So there's a lot of memes in here. Bear with us in that, but you're going to get a lot of memes because we have fun and, you know, we got to work together some way. So summarizing where kind of what Taniya and I push in our first webinar was that you really shouldn't have a summit just to have a summit. If you do, there's a high probability that you might mess something up, at least as high as there is a probability you might do something right, largely because people have expectations. Your agency has history. Your partners have some things they think that should happen a certain way. They have unique missions. They have a unique perspective. They have unique requirements, all of which, if you don't understand pretty well and really have a good idea of what you want to ask of them, when you get them there, things can go south on you because of those changing expectations. So we laid out in that presentation, which you all can go and look at. It's been recorded, as well as the actual PowerPoint presentation where we listed out a bunch of content. Essentially comes down to these 4 points. These are the things you need to do before you decide to have a summit. Number one, look at if you're an agency, and I think everybody on this call is, dig into your data, figure out what you can about the participation rates of your hunters, anglers, shooting sports participants, whatever is going to be the focus of your R3 Summit. Look at their demographics. What are their churn rates? What kind of participation over time? What kind of things are they pursuing? Get all of that information up to date so that you know exactly what you're dealing with in terms of your population. Secondarily, once you sort of figure out what's going on with your target hunters or anglers or your R3 participants, figure out who your partners are. Now, the process for stakeholder mapping, again, is in that previous presentation, but basically it's this. Figure out all of the potential partners you have. I guarantee you there's more than you think you have. And then put them in buckets based on the relationship you have with them or not. What you're going to find is maybe out of 100 qualifying potential partners, there's 4 or 5 that the agency only really has some kind of a working relationship. Maybe there's another 3 or 4 where you have an agency staff person or a little bit of history that has done some work, but not a whole lot. At the end of the day, you're going to build this strata of engagement and relationships with all your partner groups. The final thing you want to do is ask them, what do they want? What do they expect? What are their feelings about your agency? What are the type of participants they want to focus on? What kind of things can they do? Get all of that information about that suite of partners. That will allow you to understand what their position is in contrast to what your agency's position is and what they can do. And when you finally get them together, you'll have a pretty good idea of what's going on inside their heads. So you can steer the conversation in a way and the summit in a way that is constructive based on their needs, not what your assumptions. Third thing, there's some work to do inside your organization. Do you guys have an R3 plan? Do you have R3 strategies? Have you done ORAM mapping? Do you know what R3 programs you have? Do you know which ones? Do you have any outcome data on any of those programs? What's your agency's long-term vision? Typically, a lot of that information is housed in 3 or 4 different places, and it's tricky to get, but an R3 coordinator needs to spend some time getting a good idea of what the agency is planning to do, what it's been trying to do in the past, the impacts of its current program, and an idea of where its big holes are. That's why we encourage do ORAM mapping. Again, information on that in the first presentation, plenty of videos online. Also, the council's, I always forget the name tonight. Help me. What is it called?
But the Hunting and Shooting Sports Archery Practitioner's Guide.
That has a ton of resources that can help you do some of these tactics. But complete all of that first so that before you go to a summit, you know what capacity you have, you know the history that you have, you know what your main barriers, holes, and opportunities are. Fourth and finally, we are of the opinion, and particularly I am, you shouldn't get a big bunch of partners together in a big fancy room with food and speakers and a lot of performance unless you're ready to follow through with that. One of the worst things that I've seen happen with agencies and their partner relationships is when they have a big summit, and at the end of the summit, they basically say, thank you for coming. It was great to see you all. We don't know what's going to happen now. During a summit, you're going to be building expectations, whether you like it or not. Those folks are going to come there, spend their time, their money. Remember, a lot of these organizations are volunteer organizations, and they're expecting some sort of a thing to happen. And that's a long-term thing. That's not just, hey, it was great to meet you all, and we're going to go back and do our own thing. So look very hard at your organization's ability to carry through some sort of an engagement with those partners. This is a really important point, though. I don't want to lose you here. You have to be prepared to have a 3 to 5 year engagement with all of those people that are that are going to show up there, whether it be communication, involving them quarterly, biannually, some sort of an engagement plan over time. Hear me on this one. If you are not ready to do that, if you're only one person and you haven't figured out where your capacities are, maybe an R3 summit isn't the kind of engagement you're ready for. Maybe you're ready for more one-on-one engagement. You can do your stakeholder mapping on your own. You find out your top 3 or 4 organizations and you just focus on them individually for targeted things. But to do this big gathering is really going to require some capacity on your part to follow through. So once you have done all that work, you're really at a decision point. Can we have this or can we not? And if you've done all that work and you realize, you know what, I think we probably could. We know inside our own heads, our partners' heads, we've done that work. We've got some capacity to follow through. We're kind of the opinion, then go ahead and have a summit. But really, if you only want to do these 2 things, you're launching a big effort and you need feedback and engagement in that effort, like a new R3 plan or a new large statewide R3 initiative. Or you have developed a long-term stakeholder engagement plan where you need all those folks you're going to invite to be an active part of what you're doing, and you have a plan for them. It's a good idea to have a summit. Both of those 2 categories are worthy of that big event. If that's not what you're trying to do, if you're just trying to do updates or something, maybe this summit as we've defined it isn't the best way to go. Okay, let me pause here, and I'm going to turn it over to Taniya because I've said some stuff maybe you agree with, maybe you don't agree with, maybe you're thinking of other things. Now's your time to talk back at us a little bit.
So I see Pam's got her hand up, and I hope that this is relevant to what you're hoping to share. But like Matt said, this could be controversial, right? We're making this dichotomy here that, like, unless you have capacity to engage with a bunch of people all at once and you have a targeted direction, you should not be interacting with a bunch of your partners, right? Unless you've got a plan in place for what you're going to do with them, and unless it's as a way towards implementing R3 initiatives together as a collective community, leave them alone. You could potentially do more damage than good. That could be controversial. You might have this idea in your head that, hey, I have an action item I have to do, and it's called a stakeholder summit because #R3. Or my entire agency is looking at me saying, why haven't we had an R3 summit yet? R3 community says, do a summit, right? So tell me about what you're thinking about these things. And Pam, I hope your comment fits kind of within some kind of related umbrella to that. And if so, please feel free to hop off and jump in here.
It is actually talking about the summit. So I tried to go to the first R3 summit this year. It was in Alabama, and I had signed up and everything, but unfortunately my state wouldn't send me because after the agenda came out, there was nothing in there about freshwater fishing or saltwater fishing. There's not really any angler engagement to the R3 summits that you guys put on. So I'm trying to learn how to hold summits and talk to stakeholders. However, there's not an avenue for me to get there. South Carolina does not have an R3 coordinator, so there's not a whole lot of communication going on. And so everybody kind of does their own thing. What would you recommend aside from just virtual and learning online? Are there any other ways for me to go to a conference? Because I learn by talking to people and having face-to-face conversations. How to implement these things when we don't necessarily get to travel, because again, there was nothing on SEAFWA. Even though I submitted a presentation, it all got denied because it's Angler.
Yeah, well, I will say that we are open to hosting angler and like freshwater and saltwater content at the symposium. All of the presentations that are submitted through our abstract process, though, are scored against each other based on theme, and they're grouped by theme. And so there's a process and a selection committee that goes through those to select what's most pertinent to the audiences that are there. But one of the things I would push back on is that most R3 content, which is covered at the symposium and at RBFF's conferences, is relevant regardless of whether you work on hunting and shooting sports or fishing and angling. So, or fishing and boating. So I would push back on your leadership that there's nothing pertinent for you at the R3 symposium, because R3 is relevant across the board. And we actually partner with RBFF on the trainings that are hosted, the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, on the trainings that are hosted at the symposium so that it is relevant to people across the field. That being said, if it is required that explicit fishing content is on the agenda, RBFF has a fantastic marketing engagement annual conference. Area has an annual conference where you could be connecting with other people in the field, and those are some of the places that you could connect. In addition to that,
I go to RBFF, so that's
okay.
That's the positive thing. And then I just
Yeah.
joined Area, but you know, sometimes there is a lot of R3, but I want to expand, I guess, my knowledge in a way for the whole state to be able to use this. We do send, you know, SCDNR does send representatives, but it's mostly from the licensing office. And then we don't ever hear anything back, and they don't really know what programs are going on. And unfortunately, it's just a lack of communication, but I would like to get more involved with R3 for our state, because ultimately, you know, that's my job.
Yeah. I think in addition to that, there could be some internal conversations you might be interested in having as a team. And that's where folks like Olivia and Matt and myself could come in and supplement the conversation with you internally, right? I just co-hosted a meeting, a partner summit in Texas with their team, where we, as a multifaceted, I guess, cross-silo or cross-division team, got together, staff and partners, to plan the agenda, and then brought all of those related partners in for the summit itself. And that really helped to align the whole state on where they were going where they were going together. And so those are some of the services that we offer. I know, Matt, you want to hop on quick and talk a little bit about some of the other ways that we could help within a specific state, or that you could help within a specific state?
Well, no, that's basically it. What I hear you struggling with, Pam, is kind of tangential to having a partner R3 summit. It's more you as a state fish and wildlife agency haven't figured out sort of what your strategy with R3 is, maybe not understand what R3 is, and don't have a vision or capacity for that. So that's what I would recommend, is either on a webinar, a phone call, or a flight out there. You have an initial conversation with across divisions, across departments that you think might have a vested interest in R3 or some influence there. And we have a basic education talk, what it is, what it isn't, what's being done, and essentially hammer out a lot of the questions that they probably have, and maybe some of the disagreements. That would be a good first step. And yeah, I know I and Taniya have done that a bunch. So you have that as a resource.
Yeah, Pam, to your point, like, we'd be happy, both of us, I imagine, to just hop on a call with you to strategize what that could look like, or hop on a call with you and partners to strategize what that could look like from a one-on-one basis. And you don't have to go to a summit to get that kind of support. We can do that with you individually and with anybody else on this call who might be looking at, how do I build buy-in around R3 in my organization? How do I break down some of the silos for how we approach R3 with other teams in my state? How do we engage partners? We're here for all of that kind of support.
Jason, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and On that note, we recently did, we referred to it as an agency-wide survey over R3 and the North American Model of Conservation. And I would highly suggest, something like that as more of a baseline that can help you kind of move forward. So exactly the kind of barriers or communication issues or, the employees' understanding of R3 within the department, kind of get an idea there. You can invite Matt or Taniya in to come and talk about that and kind of show where you have room to grow in those aspects. And I think kind of picking the brain of the people within the agency might be a good place to start to kind of see where their attitudes, feelings, understanding of why this is important and how they can improve on it. A good place to go.
Great point.
Thanks for adding that. And I just want to also supplement here, Pam, like Jason does freshwater, saltwater in Texas. Also attends the National R3 Symposium every year because of that crossover of R3 content that's interdisciplinary. So just if you're looking for other ways to justify being able to attend, we can provide additional context there if you ever need it.
I'm going to tell everyone that Texas told me to, because everybody in Texas has told me this. I've met so many people like at RBFF from Texas, and the older lady that did the RBFF campaign on women anglers, I think it was, like she was trying to convince me, and I was like, yeah, you got to convince me. You got to convince my upper level staff. But I'm glad to hear that, Jason, that you are freshwater and saltwater and that you do go to the R3 summit, because then I should be able to really push for it and hopefully learn something and be able to implement it, or at least have that conversation that we're all kind of avoiding right now.
Absolutely. And, I've been to, I think the last 3 years, been to the R3 Symposium. And, while it might be talking about hunting or shooting sports, the strategies can almost be identical. It's the same tactics. It's just a different activity, so there's a ton of crossover. You also meet a lot of the players and a lot of networking between other states that have R3 coordinators that do a little bit of both. We're lucky to have R3 coordinators specifically for each, hunting, shooting, and boating, fishing, but, you're still meeting with the other R3 coordinators, and there's a lot to be learned from some of the trials and tribulations they've already gone through.
I'm also hearing a need here for us to be able to, I'm wondering how many practitioners who are strictly angling and boating who already attend the RBFF conference and are also looking for an opportunity to come to the National R3 Symposium. And if the agenda is a barrier to attending, I'm wondering what opportunities we have for addressing that. That being said, I want to make sure that we're still moving forward on our agenda for today, and would love to keep talking about what this means, right? Like the idea of only having a summit if we're in the middle of an R3 planning effort, and or we're activating stakeholder engagement plan, and or we also, well, not or, and we have the capacity to do the care and feeding of all of our partners. If anybody wants to pick a fight, today's the day. Let's do it. Let's have this conversation here. Matt Clary, I know last time we had a conversation about, holy crap, I didn't realize that it was okay to say no to a partner summit.
Yeah, I always think that the only reason to have a summit is to collaborate, and I know we can collaborate in other ways and cheaper ways to do that. So I'm always thinking about, how can we do this, streamline it, or contact each stakeholder separately, whether it be an NWTF or something like that, get those leaders together and then just talk about, say, hey, do we really need to get together, or do we just need to say, hey, what are you all doing? And we kind of collaborate that way. I know that other, it seems like every stakeholder's got an R3 coordinator now. So it's like, all right, who's doing what? And then you're almost like shuffling, okay, these guys are going to have something, they're going to have something, and we all want it to be ours. We got to have our own, right? So I'm totally outside that. I'm like, hey, if they want to run the show, we'll show up, and we're still going to have the same goal, and they're going to pay the bill, right? Or we're going to fund them a little bit of grant money, and that works too. So think outside the box, I think, is a lot of this, and don't just get hemmed up in this is ours and this is mine and this is what we should be doing. It's really this whole R3 thing, and I have to remind everybody in my agencies the same thing, is that it's not just a program, it's not just a thing. It's everybody getting together and working on this. And I think that's we always try to put people in programs in boxes, and we got to keep opening those boxes and saying, hey, everybody's in this together. Let's roll with it. And then hopefully Matt and Taniya can keep us zoned in on focusing, because I'm always out looking outside the box too much sometimes. But I think in reality, though, if it's just the goal is to collaborate and to get everybody together and figure out, we could probably do it easier anyway.
One thing that Matt just hit on was this concept of like, there are other ways to engage with stakeholders. There's lots of different ways to do that. It doesn't always have to be a summit. So I'm curious from other people on the call as well, like, what are some of your other forms of stakeholder engagement that you've seen that aren't just strictly this definition of R3 summit that Matt gave us at the beginning of the presentation?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Go for it.
My camera back on. My office is a little messy, so no judgment. I just moved. But we originally had like a Facebook group for our partners where we could talk and share like different events that were going on. But I think like my biggest barrier, or like the biggest problem, is exactly what Matt was talking about, is everybody has like their own bubble. And for us, it's like trying to figure out how we get folks to multiple bubbles and in our participation. And so one thing that I've seen in our past stakeholder or R3 summits is everybody's so excited to talk about their programming and all the good work that they do. They don't really like figure out how to move people along to other programs. You know, it's like very like singular. And so I've struggled with trying to figure out how we do that as an agency, because I think that's probably our responsibility to like get them working together, because we can't take everybody through the ORAM, right? That's never going to happen. You know, we're all really small groups. So I would love some ideas on how to make that happen. I've seen some mapping and some other stuff, but we've paused our summit because we just don't have the capacity right now. And with doing that, we've created like a one pager of this is the R3 work that we're doing and our plans for the future, so they don't feel like they've just been shunned or like left in the dark. But yeah, I would love some other ideas, because I don't know how to do that moving forward. But
So Rachel, when you say we're all in our bubbles, are you talking your agency divisions or departments, or are you talking your agency and your partner organizations?
Specifically meaning our partners, like everybody's in their own bubble doing their work, but that could for sure be the case for our agency and divisions here too.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, and why I want to
caught up, but
okay, no, appreciate that. And why I want to clarify that is, this is a great example of something we're gonna talk a little bit later, is how you decide what your agenda is going to be based on what the needs are. So you just expressed like, hey, our biggest problem is they're all doing their own thing. We don't know what they're doing. So I'll give you a quick recommendation just so we can kind of run through how this would go. Number one is do the stakeholder mapping and send everybody a little survey with the questions we put on our last presentation. And then the answers from all your partner groups, you catalog those into needs and barriers, so you'll know what everybody is struggling with and what their expectations are. Thing number two, I actually disagree with you a little bit in that I think you can get them all together and do mapping. So what I have done in several organizations is, since you don't want each organization to do their own map, what we'll do is we'll take all the partners that show up at a summit, we'll have breakout rooms, we'll have trained facilitators from the agency, from your organization that has already done some of this before. Frequently, I'll come in a day early and we'll train the trainers for a while, and then we'll go on and actually do the summit. And then you break up all your entities, all your partner groups by typology. So hunting groups, fishing groups, shooting sports groups. Now you all make a map and you have a facilitator do that and have them do an ORAM for the population in the state. So where does your program, your organization, where do you fit in that? And we basically map the organization's influence on the ORAM. That can be really constructive. And you do two things. Here's where I'll wrap up. Number one is you train them on the basics and the logic and the terminology of R3, and you can use that later. Everybody gets trained in that thinking. Number one. Number two, you'll have this picture you'll be able to take of the map forever that you can regurgitate back to those organizations and say, hey, you said you guys were really good in this this process of the adoption model, we'd love to engage you here. It allows you to defendably make asks of those partners, very strategic, targeted asks in the future based on an agreed upon framework that you all came to at the meeting. There's your need for a summit, and that would drive a lot of your agenda. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this conversation. That's exactly how you come up with objectives, is having a problem like that and thinking, all right, what are the tips and tricks we might use when we get them together for long-term engagement?
Just want to add on to that really quickly. We did a very similar process when we were in Texas, and people were able to see on the map that we did together, oh crap, we're all doing recruitment. There's few of us that are doing retention, and next to no one doing reactivation. And there are a huge number of us that feel like we have to do all of it. And yet those same organizations are the ones that think that we're overburdened or overstretched or overwhelmed and don't have enough resources for staffing or events. Crap, right? Like, that was a really illuminating moment for everybody in the room to hit on exactly what you're talking about. And I love that Matt brought that up and highlighted the importance of doing that. David, did I just steal what you were going to say? And I'm so sorry if I did.
You did, and that's fine. But I mean, it's still working. I actually got phone calls from folks yesterday still talking about the summit we just did and how much they appreciated being able to share information and find out, how to help with some of their barriers. Because everybody has something that they're doing really well, but they also have some things that they like to do better. And they find out there are other folks that are already doing it. And what they need to know is, how do I partner with these folks, who they are? Is there an easy way to get the introduction? And then let's talk about what we can do next. So it's really worth it. But you've got to do something that Matt talked about and Taniya alluded to. You've got to have a pre-summit questionnaire that kind of gets to where they are, but also find out what they need. And then it's a lot easier having those conversations once they get there.
Thank you for chiming in there. Again, sorry for stealing some of that thunder, but I really appreciate you talking about that personal experience and the kind of the lasting impact that it's having there. Any final thoughts about this idea of whether to have a summit and how you get at some of the problems that you're having within your organization or between your partnerships with a summit before we launch into the next step? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is how there are some building blocks to every single summit. Like, it doesn't really, no matter what your objectives are, no matter who's in the room, no matter what your specific activities are going to be, these are the skeleton pieces that every summit should have as a part of it. Okay. Now, how they're delivered and what they look like on the ground will look a little different each time, and depending on who you are and how your relationships are formed. But these are the chunks that fit into almost every single summit agenda. So this is the structure we're going to work from. So every summit should have a welcome and a purpose, an overview of our 3 basics, a presentation of the state of the state, a peek inside your partners' heads, active engagement activities that are hands-on, and a summary that wraps up, makes meaning of what you've been talking about, and provides very clear next steps. We're going to get into each one of these pieces and what it can look like and give you some ideas about what implementation and planning for this can be. But this is where you're starting. This is the skeleton you're building details from. So with that, as Matt talked about earlier, your objectives or why you're having the summit in the first place are going to drive what these pieces look like. So let's have a conversation about what some of those preparatory pieces look like. So let your objectives lead. Your facilitation style and the activities that you do are catered to your objectives. For example, let's say you do a pre-summit questionnaire where you find out that you've got a ton of people doing recruitment and nobody doing retention. You're going to want to do a mapping exercise to illustrate that to everybody in the room. So you can identify gaps you already know about with everybody watching, so you can start strategizing about how to fill those gaps. Right? So if one of your objectives is what Rachel was just talking about, that's going to tell you exactly what kind of activities you need to do by collecting some of that data ahead of time, setting your objectives for the meeting. Also, having an idea of what you're trying to accomplish and the activities that you want to do is going to tell you exactly where you should hold your meeting how big your room needs to be, how you should lay the room out. Are you going to be doing some small group work where you need to have tables grouped together so people can talk with one another? And also, are you going to need to bring in a co-facilitator? You might need a me or a Matt to provide some national context to the conversation you're having in the room. Or if it's just a follow-up opportunity, you might just be able to do it yourself or with one other partner from within your agency. But what you're trying to accomplish is going to determine that. So again, having your objectives clearly articulated and clearly identified before you create your agenda is going to drive what you fill your agenda with. It's going to drive whether you need AV or what materials you need. Do you need big sticky paper up on the wall and markers? Do you need exit tickets printed off ahead of time? Do you need, Matt's classic is, do you need a plastic rectangular table cloth that gets glued to the wall and has spray adhesive on it and painter's tape and post-it notes? Or do you need some way to engage through a virtual setting of some kind? It's also all those pre-objectives are that what you're trying to achieve with this meeting is also going to drive the length of your agenda. And again, the use of outside talent or a co-facilitator. So let your objectives lead in this situation. Make sure that you're aligning the activities and your agenda with what you're trying to accomplish. So first and foremost, let's start with that very first block of your agenda. You've got your objectives in mind. Now you've got everybody in the room, and we're going to welcome everyone. We're going to kick off our day together. And we're assuming that we've got a one-day agenda that we've created, and the first block of that is our welcome and purpose. It's really great to have leadership from your organization give a welcome. It shows that your organization is supportive of this initiative, is highly bought in, and it shows a level of continuity across, as a unified front across your organization. So if you have them come in and give a warm welcome, that welcome should set the tone, tenor, and purpose of the meeting. So you're having people say, today we're in the room to do X, Y, or Z, whatever your objective is. Clearly articulate that at the beginning of the meeting so everyone in the room knows, here's what we're trying to do. And ideally, that should have been communicated in the invite materials that went out weeks before as well, so people are mentally preparing for this engagement. You're going to give an overview of your agenda. Here's what we're hoping to accomplish today. Here's what the agenda items are to get us there. You give everybody some housekeeping tips. Got to go to the bathroom. Here's the proper time, place, and manner for that. We're going to be doing some engagement, and so we'd love it if you could, however you want people to engage throughout the day, and what your expectations are for crowd interaction. You'd state that during your welcome. And last but not least, you want to make sure that you share the big picture of R3. Why are we here now? And how does that fit into the bigger picture of where you're trying to go? How does it fit into your R3 plan? How does it fit into the statewide conditions of R3 and future implementation of R3 together? Give the big picture. Next.
Okay. Oh, are you doing this one or am I doing this one?
This is all you. Welcome. This is all you.
Okay. Cool. As you can see, that's why we spend a lot of time on memes. So let me pause here. I want to go back to the beginning just to make sure we're still on the same page. I want to go back to Rachel, your example, and emphasize the why and how that drives everything that we're going to talk about here. So you did something that is what I like to start with before I have a summit and I decide what goes in each of these building blocks we're sharing with you. And that is, I figure out what I call them barriers. You can call them problems. You can call them struggle points. So with my organization, I don't start with saying, hey, what are our objectives? What I start with is, hey, what's eating our lunch on R3? What are our problems? You're gonna come up with things like this. We don't have enough staffing. Our divisions don't talk to each other. We've never done an assessment of what our R3 efforts are, and we don't know if they're effective. We're not sure what our leadership commitment is. We don't have enough money. Okay, you're going to come up with all these barriers. Now, in your case, Rachel, you came up with another one, which is all of our partners are just off doing their own thing. They don't know what we're trying to do. They don't understand the basics of R3, and they don't know where they fit in the picture. So that would be a barrier I would write down and I'd stick on the wall. Now, when it comes to forming objectives, it becomes easy because the objectives are the solutions to the barriers. With each one of those barriers, you ask yourself, how could we fix this? Now, some of those internal ones with the agency, like we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough money. A summit's not going to fix that. There's not really an objective to form there. However, the problem with our agency is siloed and our divisions don't know what each are doing in relation to R3, that could be a thing you could tackle at a summit. You can have them do some ORAM mapping. You could have them engage with some partners. And then the thing that you just said too, or that you noted too, we really do need a meeting where we've got some breakout rooms, we have some facilitators, we need some big walls where we can hang some sheets, and we need, 3 hours to have our partners and our agency folks do some mapping. Just want to give you an example. That's how you work from a problem to an agenda point, and that's how that drives what you need to do with an agenda. The other thing I want to state here is kind of how I think about these blocks that we're giving you. So I think we listed 5 or 6 things. So full transparency. This may not be the only way to have a summit. I've tried a bunch of different things in the past. These building blocks that we're showing you are what I have found in general. If you do something in each of these blocks, you're probably going to have a successful summit. If you miss one of these blocks, you increase the probability that you're going to get confusion, that people will walk away not knowing exactly what's going on, and you may impede your future engagement. So that's why we're showing you these blocks the way they are. Again, feel free to push back or add some things. This is just purely our experience. Okay, enough throat clearing there. You've done your welcome. You've done your purpose. That was our previous slide. One tactical thing I would add there is in welcome and purpose, I try to do 2 things. I like to establish authority and commitment. So I want the highest level authority in my organization there saying, hey, I think this is important. Thank you all for being here. It's important enough that I'm willing to spend at least 10 minutes of my time to come here and tell you that's important. They can leave later, that's fine. But that authority, so that all the partners in the room know, oh, at the highest level of your organization, you guys are into this. Then number 2, commitment. This is where you want to put a face for your partners. When remember, an agency isn't actually an entity. It's a bunch of humans sitting in chairs. It's not this third thing. We often talk about an agency like it's this thing over us. No, it's just us sitting in chairs working together. Your partners need a face to engage with those people sitting in chairs. So your leadership speaks, then the second person that should go over the agenda and some of the expectations and all that, let that be the R3 coordinator or whoever is going to lead partner engagement down the road. So right away they have a face they can engage with and they know, hey, it's Samantha that I'm going to talk to when I have a question. Once you've done that, you go into your basics, and let's look at this slide here, the building blocks. I promise you, the majority of your partners have nowhere near the education in R3 that you have. They haven't heard the fancy words. They don't know the acronyms. And they're thinking of R3 as going to be really binary. Get kids involved, or the particular audience that I work on, they're the most important. Get them involved in this way, and that would fix our problem. They're all going to be in those silos. So you need to expand their brains a little bit. Give them why we care about this. Use national level data. What I'm referring to here is like the animation slide that Dr. Lauren Chase and I have put together showing how hunters are aging through time. That is really impactful to an audience of normies who have never thought about this stuff. And they go, oh my gosh, at national level, we see this hunter population moving through time and it's about to crash. My gosh, we need to pay attention. So give them some shock value at a national level, the things, the big whys. Then add to that give them some insider information. So, the national survey, national level data that the council has put together, that our BFF has, these numbers are things that these folks have never seen. It will blow their minds. Plus, you make them insiders. You make them experts in R3. You get them on your side like, hey, we all know the deep secrets of what's going on here. We've seen the data. We all have this shared insider perspective. Play it up just like that. Make them part of the solution. Make them part of your expert team, and they'll feel like they want to be on that team. Explain, I think probably the simplest way to set up a framework of thinking for the future is the ORAM. After you've given them some background information, the ORAM provides the first step in solutions. So what are we going to do about it? What are we doing about it? Well, here's how our agency thinks about how a hunter, an angler, a shooting sports participant is made. The ORAM is based on social science, so you can evoke authority there and say, hey, this is basically what 50 years of social science has shown us. And what I would encourage you to do is tell it in a story. I often use a person that I've introduced into hunting, and I ask their permission, and I start telling the story of their journey. And I have the ORAM up there, and I say, here's what happened at these stages. If you're really gutsy, it's really fun to do, but you got to be kind of like me. You got to just not care about what's going to happen. Is you ask somebody in the crowd, hey, who's an adult onset hunter? Who started hunting late in life? And you can ask them questions about what made you aware of hunting? What got you interested? What gave you your first trial? When did you make that decision to continue? And you can ask the person each of the blocks of the ORAM in front of the whole crowd. That is incredibly impactful for them to understand how you as an organization is thinking about R3, and that this acronym R3 is really focused on people. That remember, all of these organizations, these are passion-led individuals, and they're thinking about people. They're not thinking about the North American model of conservation. They're not thinking about your budgets. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about the humans eyeball to eyeball that they're working with day in and day out. Okay, quickly through the rest of this, establishing the effort that's going on nationally. Again, the council, RBFF, has a lot of good resources so that you can tell your audience, we are part of a big thing that's happening nationally. Let's join the cool kids. And then finally, if you've done all those things in your basics, you will have been establishing some shared terminology, some shared thoughts, some shared definitions, all of which you can reference in published documents thanks to that practitioner's guide that Taniya talked about. All of that stuff is there, including like the SEAFWA R3 definitions. How long should this take? Depending on your objectives, but I would give a solid 45 minutes to this, a tight 45 on this, and it takes some discipline to do that, but it's worth setting up in the front end. Otherwise, you'll get to the end of the summit. Actually, Steve Hall might remember this. I shortchanged this in a summit in Texas way before Taniya did her thing. And the first question I got at the end of the summit was, what is R3? So I spent a whole day with these people, and there were folks at the end who still didn't understand what R3 was because I didn't take the time to educate them. I assumed they knew because I was inside my own head. Next slide. Okay, this section should be brief, and be careful of this one because this can go long if you're not careful. After you've given them the big context picture of R3, zoom it back into what they care about. Folks, they don't care about what's happening nationally. They care about what their organization is doing, and their organization is local. There's a standard marketing totem, which is all expertise is local. You got to bring it back to what they care about. So tell them about what's going on in our state, or in your state. Now, if you've done your pre-work, remember the first step in the pre-work when we did the overview at the beginning of this presentation was do the math. Get into your license databases, get into your surveys, find out what participation looks like in your state, and tell that to them, because I promise you, most of them have never heard that, or they've heard little snippets and they hyper-focus on them. They haven't seen the nuance of what the population is. They will have strong beliefs, they will have strong opinions and attitudes, all of which that need to be contextualized with actual data. Who are our hunters? How old are they? How many are men? How many are women? What's their ethnicity? What's their race? What's their lapse rate? What's their recruitment rate? These are things that they need to see. Otherwise, they're going to be driving their questions to you and their demands based on their perceptions. And if you haven't given them the objective truth, it's perception against perception. And I promise you, you're going to lose that battle 100% of the time. So give them those high-level data, a brief overview of what your organization is trying to do, and any information it's learned about your partner base, or excuse me, it's learned about your participant base. This shouldn't be long. This should be 20 minutes. The best ones I've seen are in 20 minutes because it forces you to be on point, very data-oriented, very summarized. If this goes into 30, 40 minutes, it gets a little bit too, it forces you to talk too much about yourself as an organization, which you don't want to do. You want to be talking about what you know in the state and some of the general things you're trying to do. Next slide. Here again, I'm going to harken back to the pre-work. If, as David emphasized, if you've done your work in understanding your partners, if you've done stakeholder mapping, if you have sent those individuals a questionnaire or some otherwise gathered information about their barriers, their expectations, what they're trying to do, what their focus is, if you've done that, all you've got to do here is summarize those data. And this is really powerful because, again, these folks are inside their own heads. They've been running their organization based on a specific mission with a specific target audience based on, honestly, feelies. The volunteers that feel the thing that they're doing is the most important. And it is important. But it's not the only thing that's happening. So if you can share with all of them anonymously, because all these data are going to be anonymized, right? It's not you're looking at this one organization versus this other organization. All these anonymized data, you can say, look, amongst all of you that are here today, we found here's the top 3 things you struggle with. Here's the top 4 things that are your barriers. Here's your expectations of our agency. And this is really powerful when you say, here's the problems you've had with the agency. You can have an open-ended question where you say, hey, what's the history? What concerns do you have with the agency? What bad experiences? If you don't put a name to that, people will just read what folks are saying and they'll go, yeah, I kind of feel that too. But nobody feels targeted. And you as an organization don't have to react because you're not getting targeted by a person. And everybody feels, or everybody gets the context of seeing, okay, this world is a little bit bigger than just me and my organization. The final thing you want to do is also highlight the great work that's being done. So in that questionnaire, you can ask, what would you count as your the greatest success your organization has done in R3? End on a good note. End on, look at all this amazing stuff you guys are already doing. You're already doing R3. Thank you so much. We just want to help you. We want to coordinate so that all this success has a bigger effect. Back to you, Taniya.
I'd like to offer 2 types of course correction at this point before we launch into like, what does the second half of your agenda look like? One is that oftentimes when I've been working with state agencies on doing a stakeholder summit and creating the agenda, I see a lot of emphasis on providing an agency update to partners. And I've seen whole agendas that are only the agency telling partners what the agency is doing. And so I would encourage to steer away from that because the message that sends is what we're doing is the only way to do it. And we want you to come along with us, right? As opposed to here's a collaborative picture that we're creating together of what we're capable of doing together. Here's some opportunities we have. What do we think about that? And how do we work together to achieve those shared goals and visions? A lot more buy-in in that second version. So this outline that Matt's been articulating here helps to do that. When you're really engaging and articulating what partners are perceiving as barriers, people feel heard and understood, and that provides people with a pathway forward in relationship development and in building momentum together as a part of this larger team. So course correction number 1, don't just talk about yourselves or your agency. Make sure there's opportunity to create a group environment and have a conversation and hear about what's going on with partners. The second course correction is you should be balancing out how much time you're listening and talking, just in general. Like engagement is such an important part of how these work, and in favor of more engagement on this particular call so that we're practicing what we preach. Keith Warnke, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Taniya, and thank you both for this overview and the building blocks. Just an experience that I've had in the past, and I want to get your feedback on it. You get to one of these summits, a lot of this is well laid out. You're talking about R3, but there is, in my experience, a significant portion of your partners who will be of the attitude that we don't need more hunters and anglers. We don't want enhanced participation. How would you respond to that? How would you prepare for that?
A great question. We both have a lot of experience with this specific topic. I'll give just a quick touch here and hand it over to Matt for his thoughts on the same thing. When you do a partner assessment on the front end of a summit, you can do a question about R3 attitudes that helps to tease out high-level themes like this one. If you know you've got a large number of partners that are coming in with this idea of like, oh, R3 is just trying to create more hunters and we don't necessarily need to do that. We just need to take care of our existing hunter base and move forward. you then have an opportunity to say, okay, here's some perceptions we as a group can norm, or that we have as a group have an opportunity to address. And then you can create agenda items around that. To me, a lot of what Matt gets to in the earlier parts of this agenda, the R3 basics, the why of what we're doing, and then the state of the state that points out opportunities, sometimes that's enough information for at least some late adopters to be like, oh, suddenly it clicks. I get it now. There's a bigger context here than what I've been functioning in that makes sense for R3 and why it's important. Some folks need more convincing, and for that, Matt's got a lot more experience on the more convincing side of things, and then how much time and energy you actually want to allocate to doing that. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. So this argument has been around since I started doing R3 in 2006. I have tried a bunch of different answers to this, because there are a bunch of different answers to this. But here is the answer that always 100% works. And Taniya, you mentioned it. When you present the why of R3, what you must do is talk about what we're trying to impact. There are two general things we're trying to impact with R3. Number one, where we are losing hunters, we want to gain. And I'm just going to say hunters. This could be any group. We're trying to gain. Or we want to make the population of hunters look more like the population of America, because as it is right now, a lot of America, or you could say North America, doesn't see themselves in hunting. And we want to keep this activity, this activity long term for a bunch of good reasons. And the only way to do that is if every American can see themselves in that activity. So you as an organization can choose, do you want to make more, or do you want to make a different population type? That brings people together at the summit, because you're allowing everybody to live out their own objectives. You can reflect that with national data. So remember, in the R3 basic slide in this presentation, I said, do the demographics thing from the national survey. Show the gender differentiation, show the age differentiation, show, or delta, really the difference between the average U.S. population and hunters. Look at age, gender, ethnicity, race, and say, does this look like America? No, this is kind of niche. We need to, whatever number we have, this needs to look more like America, so we have a robust population that will be defending this activity in perpetuity. That works every single time. So that's why you should show those data, because what you can say is, this isn't my opinion, it isn't my agency's opinion, these are what the data tell us. And there's clear things to do with those data. Now, the last thing I'll say is, I think it's only happened twice. Halfway through a summit, I have had a partner come up to me and get right in my face and say, I think everything you're trying to do is just wrong. I don't want to be here, and I'm leaving. Let them go. It does not happen often. And like I said, I've done dozens of these. Every now and again it does. Be comfortable to be uncomfortable in that case. Say, thank you for coming. Sorry we don't have a similar vision. We're going to follow up. We're going to keep you abreast, though. We're going to keep you in communications so you can see what we're doing. And if you see an opportunity to help, please let us know. Don't be afraid to let them go if it comes down to that.
Keith, does that get to the core of your question?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I just think that attitude is more prevalent than we feel like it really, than we're aware that it really is, because we do get inside of our own bubble when we get, moving down this rabbit hole of doing R3, which I can see as a barrier and obstacle for a lot of us too.
Yeah. And I think, so if you're having a hunting summit, for example, you're going to have a lot of similarly minded people in the room who are all kind of trying to do the same kinds of things. And so you'll be able to build certain momentum by grouping your partners per conversation. You may have a different summit that is for more fishing related activities, right? And again, you're going to have similar minded folks that are in the room. There'll be some variance and conversations and pushback that you get, but you'll be pointed in a similar direction. You may want to have a targeted conversation or summit or meeting or FaceTime or coffee with the people who are open, challengers of the concept of R3 to give voice to that and to help people feel really heard, and so that you're intimately familiar with where the pushback's coming from and can strategize around that. Creating space for that helps you kind of understand where people are coming from. To Matt's point, if that's a minority of folks, it's your laggards, right? It's a small chunk of your total partner engagement. I do think our agencies spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to convince people to come along for change they can't be convinced of. And so I think it's very important to draw boundaries with yourself about how much time you're willing to give people who will not come along for the ride. One key factor that I would argue here is that if those same people who are absolutely unmovable happen to be your decision makers, your go, no-go people, your implementers, or people who are directly impacted by R3 change, then it's worth spending a bit more time on.
That's what I'd add there is that the point you had on an earlier slide, when do you bring in outside talent? If you have that condition that Taniya is talking about, it is worth it to bring Taniya in, bring me in, and help with those battles because they can focus their angst on us, and we don't care. We're going to leave the next day. You can't hurt our feelings anymore. This is just all scar tissue. So take advantage of that, because what we're going to want to do is help figure out how they can become engaged and not make you as an organization targeted. So this wasn't always available to everybody in the early days of R3. You have that now. So that's a time when it might be worth to spend a little bit of money and say, we're going to bring some of these folks in for an outside meeting. We're going to have some of these, detractors in a room, and we're just going to have some conversations. I've done that many times, and it can be really fruitful.
Any other thoughts around that before we launch into kind of what the engagement could look like in your agenda?
Yeah, this is really kind of first half of the day, and thanks for the reminder, Taniya. You want to try to do most of this before lunch, and then get between this and the next section of your agenda, which you shift from sort of educating, it's mostly what you're doing, educating, to engaging. Let there be a good lunch break, let people clear their heads, get some food, and that good psychological break is really important. So yeah, any thoughts or questions? Okay, the other way you can do this, by the way, I'm not sure if one is better than the other, but you can do a full one-day summit, or you can do 2 half days. So up to this point, this would be the afternoon. Then have a good evening activity. If you're going to do this, don't just send them all off to dinner. Do some catering and bring them in and feed them, and have like a ideally you're at a location, you go out and have a campfire. Those make really good summits because we'll go out there. People say, you know what, I wasn't going to bring this up in the meeting, but this is bugging me. What would you say? And when you're sitting there at a campfire, roasting a marshmallow, having a beer, you can work through some of that. So this is where you'd want to break either for lunch or for the evening, and then start back the next morning to do another half day of the engagement stuff.
I love that. And Matt, I've seen that absolutely in practice. I know there's a couple of different partner summits that make it a multi-day, once a year, true face-to-face engagement. And I think that you're absolutely right about making space for networking, but also that vulnerable face-to-face conversation. I think that's awesome. All right, so I don't see any hands. I'm going to keep moving ahead. We're going to talk about the second half of the agenda, the engagement part of the agenda. So up until now, as Matt said, we've been talking about education and setting the stage, and what's the national context, and what's the statewide context, and what's the structure on which we're going to hang all of this meaning, right? That structure's the ORAM. We're using the ORAM to point everybody's understanding and meaning towards our shared support of comprehensive customer engagement pathways. And so the second half of the day is you want people invested in the work. You want people doing hands-on engagement with you. And so let's talk about what putting folks to work looks like when you're having a summit. This is when people have the data, they've got the understanding, and now we're doing activities to assimilate the understanding. You educators in the audience will understand that you can teach all you want, but unless people are working with what they're learning, they're not going to absorb it and start using it in practice, right? You want to give them practice so they can take it home. So you want dedicated time to solicit or gather participant input. So Matt mentioned earlier, you can throw up things like the barriers you collected in your pre-summit questionnaire, throw those up on the wall and get meaningful engagement and conversation going around very specific, detailed accounts of what the barriers are that they're experiencing. What you'll find is by opening up that kind of conversation, you'll end up with partners talking with each other about how they've overcome those barriers or suggestions on how the community could address those barriers together. Instead, you could have them break out in small groups where they're doing things like mini SWOT analysis, where as a small group, they're saying, okay, here are the barriers that we're experiencing. Here are the opportunities we see to address those barriers. And you know what? Our organization is really perfectly poised to address this thing. So I'm going to put my name right here as a partner people could call on to address this barrier and opportunity. Those small group exercises and sharing out with the group, again, starts pointing out not only who's bought in here or who still has questions, but where they fit in this bigger picture and how you can contribute or how they can contribute to this bigger picture partnership. Instead, you could have small groups or as a large group work through ORAM mapping. So again, talking about your shared customer journey and where each organization fits or where your shared customer base is getting support and where their gaps might exist and how we collectively want to brainstorm around how to fill those gaps. You could do snow carting activities, or you could talk about using digital engagement, depending on how big your group is. You could have people sharing responses to questions through, you text in responses through something like Poll Anywhere. Or you could have exit tickets that allow people to share what their commitment is as they leave the room or what they want to use as their next steps. This really is your chance to do meaningful engagement with your audience. This is the time where you're doing more listening than talking, and you are gathering the themes of conversation in the room, and you're keeping a pulse on what your statewide partner needs, barriers, and opportunities are. You're in tune during this. You're collecting feedback from these activities so that you can share it back out to the large group and act upon it in the future. So I just threw a bunch of examples here. One of the things that I think is really important is providing multiple response strategies in your engagement. You got people who are shy. You've got people who've been shot down, who are hesitant to bring their perspectives into the room. You've got people who are super excited and are going to talk more than others, or who are more comfortable or engaged with the agency and so feel more maybe stable sharing their perspective in that audience than others. So by mixing up your engagement strategies and having ways that people can share in small group or partner activities or through virtual engagement or in large group, it's going to make sure that you're gathering information from more brains than just the loud people in the room or just the confident, overt communicators in the room. So my biggest takeaway from here is do activities that align and support your objectives, number one. And number two, mix up the kind of activities that you're doing so that you're hearing from all people regardless of their demeanor. Any questions about what that looks like in practice? Or about like resources for multiple response strategies as opposed to these specific activities?
Plan on doing this for at least 2 hours in your agenda.
Can you all explain what exit tickets are? Never heard that before.
Yeah, sometimes when you got a bunch of partners in the room, you want to have them make a commitment. Or you want to have them say something like, by the way, I've got access to these specific resources. I'd love to pitch into a partnership relationship. Or you want them to say, I commit to following up with this other partner. Or I commit to coming to our next partner summit. Sometimes you want partners to say a commitment. An exit ticket is anything you do at the end that they have to hand in before they leave, right? That's all an exit ticket is. But it can be an educational strategy or a partner engagement strategy you use to get them to commit to something. And then it gives you a piece of paper or a survey response on a Google form that you can follow up with afterwards. You're having people articulate a specific takeaway of like whatever their next steps are or whatever they'd like to commit to or whatever they'd like to share. And you can call them later and be like, hey, I see here that this was your big takeaway from our partner summit. I'd love to support you in that. How can I support your ability to follow up with so-and-so? Or how can I take this to the next step with you? Gives you a lot of good information at the end of the summit, if that makes sense. Again, it can be a slip of paper, or it could be a QR code you put up on the screen that takes them to a quick questionnaire or a form they just type in a quick answer to. It could be a popcorn conversation out loud that happens around the room.
But as part of that mixed methodology, it's good to remember, I would do that in addition to the other activities I might have done before that, whether it's snow carting or SWOT analysis. They've worked in small groups. They've had a chance to listen to others. They've had a chance to do things without speaking, if they're a little introverted. After all that, mix it up and also give them an exit ticket. So anything that's left unsaid, anything that made them uncomfortable, you're still going to collect that. And they know, because you'll say this right at the beginning and part of that welcome and purpose, they'll know they're going to have multiple opportunities. So they may save different things that they want to say or do for each of those opportunities you provide.
Great questions. Any other questions about engagement activities or how you would roll these out?
I was going to say just like a brief reminder of what snow karting is.
Matt, this is one of your favorite tools. Do you want to share about it?
Well, you gave a good example of, let's say you want to understand what the biggest barriers are that is impacting everybody. So you have all your barriers up on the wall, whether they're individual, you're using the awesome sticky sheet, which I would super recommend, or if not, you can use sheets of, what's the big paper?
Like the big Post-it notes.
Thank you. The big Post-it notes. There's a name for it, and I just forgot it. Anyhow, and you write the barrier there. Then what I like to do is I give everybody 3 colored sticky dots, red, green, and yellow. Actually, not red and green, because that's bad for colorblind people. So don't put red and green together, but 3 different shades of stickers. And I tell them, this is priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Now you can choose of all these barriers we have up here, which you think is the most important, the second most important, the third most important. And you have everybody do that. So there's no speaking involved. There's no writing down. And people kind of stand and they get in front of it and they see what other people are doing. And sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't agree. It's a really interesting dynamic. But what you'll have at the end, you'll see which barriers were more prioritized by more people than less. And so the snow karting is you'll have these, what it means is it looks like you have these little snowstorms of dots, and you can do it with sticky notes and things, but these clouds of priorities that people are physically identifying. Snap a picture of that. It's a really good graphic. And then you have data at the end saying, hey, we all agreed that as a group, here's how we would prioritize all of our barriers. You can do the same thing with opportunities, ideas. It's just a way to get people to sort of anonymously say, I think that thing, and then this thing, and then this thing is the most important to me.
A couple more that I used, just kind of facilitation strategies, especially as educators. A lot of us have those kinds of tips and tricks. Like you can also use like fist to 5, an informal Likert scale in the classroom in real time. And so if you are asking about how people are feeling about a particular topic or how supportive or not supportive people are, you can say, hey, fist to 5, 0 being not supportive, 5 being highly supportive, or 0 being inexperienced, 5 being highly experienced, and everything in between. Give me a fist to 5, or hold up your hand and give me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, where you stand on this specific topic. So fist to 5, people who don't feel like talking or being articulate can share 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 quickly, and it gives you a very fast pulse check on what's going on in the audience. Or if people are tired and ready to take a break, give me a fist to 5 on whether people are ready to take a break. Turn-in talks, where it's just like a partner conversation, a turn-in talk, or just talking to a shoulder partner about a specific concept, and then having one of the partners share out what the conversation was. Again, give somebody a way to express themselves, but they don't have to be the one talking to the whole group, right? So a turn-in talk or a think, pair, share, those are terms that you'd use in a classroom for this kind of stuff, but like, I'm going to talk to you and then we're going to share out what we talked about. And the more gregarious of the two of us is the one that's going to tell the whole group. Those are just little things you pick up along the way that makes it engaging, but also inclusive of people with different styles. Matt and I, we've been doing this for years. Happy to brainstorm what that kind of engagement can look like on your agenda at any point. It's a phone call away. We can always do that together. All right, I'm gonna leave us some time. We're gonna keep moving. Last thing, you always want to end with next steps, clear expectations. So you're not gonna have a summit unless you have a comprehensive engagement plan for your stakeholders already in place. And so you want these people to leave the room knowing, like, from your main contact in your agency, what you did today and how it's going to be used next. Okay, so like at the end, there will be these work products from your engagement that are sitting there. Are they going to receive that in an email? What are you going to do with that feedback? Are you going to build it into your implementation plan for your R3 work? What's going to happen? Let them know. And then when are they going to hear from you? Next few weeks, sometime in the next 6 months, over the next year? When are they going to hear from you? And are you going to see each other again? Let people know what to expect. You should be spoon feeding and breadcrumbing their entire experience with you very clearly, not just for the immediate future, but the long-term future. And they should know exactly where they fit into that bigger picture every step of the way. This is also an opportunity for meaning making. So you've been taking notes throughout the day. You've noticed major trends in the conversation. May not have had a chance to slow down and really digest it with people. Here's also a chance to do some meaning making with the group. Hey, everybody, I heard a major trend today that addressed the fact that a lot of you are not feeling connected with one another. Maybe we can spend 5 minutes brainstorming or troubleshooting that specific theme that came up unexpectedly. You can do meaning making here. Matt, anything else you'd like to add at this stage?
No, just a tactical from the beginning, or bring it back. Remember, said authority and commitment. The person I think that should give this is that commitment person, the face that those participants remember, whether it's the R3 coordinator, whoever that happens to be, but the main contact person, so that there's some genuine trust expenditure there, and they know that that person said it, and that's the person they need to remember their email address. Also put your contact information up there for whoever their main contact is, but that ideally it's that individual. What doesn't work really well is when you like bring leadership back in who hasn't been in the trenches all day, or even if they have, it's just not going to come off as genuine when you see the person that they're going to more relate to as a normie, a worker bee, someone who's in the trenches the way they are. They're going to respond to that much better, and you'll earn a little bit more trust, and they'll tend to believe you some more than if you bring in kind of a figurehead.
A great point. This is another place where if you're going to evaluate the experience that they had in order to inform what additional needs they might still have for future partner engagement, an exit survey or a post survey link could go up here as well and say, hey, we'd love for you to fill out a couple of questions about your experience today and what you'd like to see next time before you head out. So pre-post data collection with this group of people's practice.
And a resource page. So if there's a bunch of resources now that we didn't have a bunch of years ago. There's websites, there's documents. You will have referred to a bunch of things. One of two ways you can do it. Put it up on a slide, but I would also recommend, say, in that next few weeks type of a thing, because you want to give them the time frame. Here, here's what's going to happen the next couple of weeks. Here's what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Here's what's going to happen the next year. The thing you can do right away is says you all are going to receive an email by the time you get home that's going to have all of our contact information, as well as a bunch of resources of things we talked about today, PowerPoint presentations that we shared. And if it, just tell them whenever that's going to happen, but send that out so they have a digital copy of that. So if they want to learn, there's videos they can watch, there's webinar, maybe recorded webinars like this. Well, not this one, but other ones that they feel that they are being catered to and they have stuff to do if they want to.
So with that, your turn. I'm going to stop sharing. We hope that you are ready to engage here. We've got a couple questions for you.
Or just ready to get some coffee and get out of here.
Yeah, right. We talked a lot this morning just about high level, what are the big blocks for your agenda, what those blocks can look like, making sure that things are aligned with your objectives. I'm curious, as you guys have all probably been parts of different kinds of stakeholder summits or different kinds of stakeholder meetings, what have you seen gone really poorly? What are some of the things that you see as trends in poor engagement? Go ahead, Rachel.
That was quick.
Oh, I I mean, I don't think it was anybody's fault, but it was really tough to do it virtually when we did it virtually. That was horrible. But with that too, I also see like a lot of our partners are volunteers. So, you know, they work during the day also. And so like getting them like during the week, or like to give up a weekend day, that like we kind of thought like maybe a virtual option would be better, but it's specifically when we did breakout sessions like virtually, it was I think it was really hard. But I don't know what the right answer is because a lot of our folks are volunteers and work full time, you know. So I wish somebody could give me a magic wand to tell me how to do that. But
this is interesting tonight. I don't know how you respond to this, Rachel. After doing it several times like that, I'm pretty hardline now. If your only option is virtual, don't do it. I used to not be that, but I'm there now. If an agency wants me to be a part of a virtual one, I will say no, and I'll say talk to Taniya or something like that, because I won't do them anymore. I haven't seen where it works well enough that you do more good than potential damage.
I will say I am happy to encourage people to connect with partners one-on-one in a virtual setting, no problem. And you can do a lot of the addressing barriers and opportunities with one-on-one partners easily in a virtual setting or on the phone. But I'm with Matt on if you're going to do community building and large scale mobilization of your partner base, try your best to do that in person. To your point, like a survey, a questionnaire out to your volunteer people that says like, what is the best time to meet? We're going to try to meet the bulk of you. What works best for you? We're going to accommodate as best we can. What else have you seen not play out well? Partner engagement or partner summits? Right, Keith?
One of the real struggles I have seen in the past is even with summary, clear next steps, expectations, and resources, it's kind of the inertia and lack of follow-up. Once people leave the facility, they go back to doing what they've always done. So it's really incumbent upon us as the person of authority or the R3 coordinator to make sure you've identified some of the key players to follow up with and follow up with frequently. That's where I feel like we fall down frequently.
So keeping the momentum high and riding the momentum through regular communication, follow up.
Yeah, I think that's a good, actually it's a good reality check. That's going to happen no matter how amazing you are and how many staff you have. Momentum will dwindle. So anticipate that. But the second thing is, it's also part of the pre-work we were encouraging you to do. Look really hard at your capacity to commit to relationships, because if you know you're going to lose momentum, it means you're going to have to work 2 or 3 times as hard to keep their engagement through time and build a relationship. Remember, folks, at the heart of this, stakeholder engagement is relationship building. There's no other way to say that. Relationships are hard and they take time and commitment. And if you're not ready to do that, it's better to not get in one. So yeah, it's a really good point you bring up, Keith. You can't avoid it, so think carefully before you step into it.
Yeah, there's no partner Tinder dating going on in R3. Like, this is long-term commitment marriage kind of stuff.
With a lot of broken history and toxic relationships, every one of these groups comes with
Everyone's
a lot
divorced.
of
baggage. I'd follow up real quickly that in addition to relationship building, you're also constantly laying the groundwork to facilitate change and to facilitate a behavioral change by utilizing the ORAM. And that never happens, well, rarely happens in one instance or one experience.
I'm about to throw a kink here, going back to the basics of R3, but who are you targeting for your stakeholders? Are these nonprofits? Are these industry folks? Like, who are our stakeholders?
So briefly, this is what we talked about in one of the previous presentations. That stakeholder mapping is about answering that very question. So the first step in that is for you as an organization to think very clearly about what your criteria are. In general, we call them R3 vested organizations. So organizations that create the participants you're trying to create or support those participants in some way. So this would be like an outdoor related industry, a mom and pop archery shop, something like that, who could also be engaged. But it really is, what I would encourage you to do is tailor it to those organizations that are supporting other humans in getting into a certain activity, whether it's hunting, shooting sports, whatever the other activity is, and or those groups that support those individuals once they're created. That takes some internet research. And like I said, you can expect, if it's narrow to something like just angling, you're probably going to have on the order of 40 to 50 you'll find in your state. If you blow that up to hunting, fishing, shooting sports, you may get as high as 100.
Okay.
And then the stakeholder mapping helps you prioritize. Most of those 100 will be people you've never heard of and you have no relationship with. That's why you want to put them in that bucket to know they exist, and you may engage them in the future, but they're just there. And then you want to work backwards and find out those organizations that are the most vested, they have the most engagement. So you can prioritize where you're going to invest your very finite relationship resources.
Okay. Do you know if any states have, tiptoe this one, politicians as stakeholders, or is that, because we're a heavily politically ran state, obviously they make our rules and regs. So I was just curious about that.
You can, go ahead, Taniya.
I was just going to say, there's a different kind of engagement for politicians. I would keep them outside of your partner summits because they're not in the implementation arm of R3 in your state. I would have meaningful R3 education related conversations with those folks and barrier conversations with those folks, either in a one-on-one or a small group setting, so that you're calibrating together and you're identifying opportunities to work together on specific initiatives. Matt.
Yeah, a tactic for this, I absolutely agree with Taniya. Do not invite them as part of the stakeholder meeting. The best way to do this tactically as an agency is a two-parter. So I've done this in a handful of states where the day before the summit, they have scheduled a commission update or a commission session where it's just me and the agency, and I give them a closed door session of what we're going to do and why. Give them the national picture of R3. We talk a little bit about say stuff, and we spend 4 hours where they hammer on me and I hammer back. And we deal with it in that way, face to face, the way they usually like to behind closed doors. Then what we can say is, this stuff is going to be happening tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to have this stakeholder meeting. If you're interested in listening in, go ahead, be welcome. Most of the time they don't show up because the questions they have will have been answered in that closed door room, and they will have had their say. That is the best way to do it. If you're struggling with that political thing, deal with it separate, deal with it before, set their expectations. And if your leadership feels so inclined, you can invite them to observe the following day rather than directly participate.
I want to be mindful of our time here. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to Olivia briefly. I love front porch time. I'm a Midwesterner. Goodbyes last forever. So I'm happy to stick around for a long Midwestern goodbye with anybody that's interested in hanging out or asking more additional questions. But out of respect for your time, I'm going to call it quits here. And Olivia, I don't know if you have any wrap up announcements you'd like to make for your crew.
Yeah, I do. Just real quick here. I know you guys just got a ton of great tools, both from this session and the last session. And then two, of having the permission not to host a summit or a stakeholder meeting if you're not there yet. But then also to have support if you are there and you are ready to have a stakeholder meeting or a summit. And two, being intentional, letting the objectives lead the conversation. And again, having these extra facilitation tools to help support you along the way. I wanted to say I'll send out the PowerPoint and the recording along with all 3 of our emails so that you have it. we want to continue having these conversations with you all and give you like very specific support with your states, because I know you all are all structured different and have your own specific needs too, but we'd like to continue on those conversations and support tailored to your state. Again, just huge thank you to Taniya and Matt for sharing their years of experience, scar tissue, and memes along the way. We just appreciate it so much. So also too, December 18th is our next SEAFWA gathering. It's again 1 week earlier because of Christmas too. So can have it as a save the date. But that is all. Thank you, everybody.